The story told at court went like this. After one of their furious rows, Albert walked out, went to his private rooms, and locked the door behind him. A moment later, there was a knock. From inside, he called out, "Who is there?" And the voice on the other side answered, "The Queen of England." He did not move. The knocking came again. Again he asked who was there, and again came the answer, "The Queen of England." The door stayed shut. It only opened, so the story goes, when the knocking softened and a different voice said, "Your wife, Albert." Whether that scene happened exactly as it was later retold or not, it captures something the marble monuments and the greatest love story in history never do. Because the marriage of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, the couple the whole world holds up as the perfect Victorian romance, was also a war of tempers, of control, of a woman who was a queen before she was a wife, and a man determined to be master in a house where, by law, he was nothing. This is the dark truth behind the perfect marriage. We have all been sold the same picture. Victoria and Albert, madly in love, 9 children, the model family that taught an entire empire how to live, the Christmas tree, the devoted husband, the widow who mourned for 40 years. It is one of the most romantic images in royal history, and the extraordinary thing is that the love was real. That is exactly what makes the rest of the story so surprising. Because underneath the devotion ran a current of conflict so fierce that servants learned to stay out of the way when it broke. Victoria had a temper that frightened people. She had grown up an isolated, indulged, strong-willed girl, and she became a young woman who could fly into a rage in an instant, shouting, weeping, slamming doors. Marriage did not soften it. The rows between her and Albert were volcanic, and they were frequent, and they were loud. Albert fought back in the coldest way imaginable. He did not shout. When Victoria lost her temper, he would simply go silent, leave the room, and refuse to engage. And then, instead of speaking to her, he would sit down and write. He sent his own wife long, careful, wounding letters, memoranda almost, laying out where she had gone wrong, how her temper shamed her, how she must master herself. To a woman desperate for his warmth, that icy, reasoning withdrawal was its own kind of weapon, and it drove her to further fury. She raged. He retreated and wrote. She raged harder. That was the rhythm of the great love story, over and over, for years. If you find the truth behind these polished royal images as gripping as I do, take a second to subscribe. This channel is about exactly that, the human wreckage hidden behind the perfect portrait. Now, back to the real battle underneath the rose, which was never really about temper at all. It was about power. Here is what made this marriage unlike almost any other of its age. In every ordinary Victorian household, the husband ruled. But Victoria was not an ordinary wife. She was the queen. She held the power, the throne, the red boxes of state papers that came to her and not to him. And in the first years, she guarded that power jealously. She loved Albert, but she did not intend to let him rule. She kept him out of government. She would not let him see the confidential dispatches. When he offered opinions, she made clear that reigning was her business and hers alone. For an intelligent, ambitious man, it was unbearable, and he set out to change it. Not by confrontation, but by making himself indispensable exactly when she was weakest. And the thing that made Victoria weakest, again and again, was pregnancy. They had 9 children in 17 years, and this is one of the darkest and least romantic truths of the whole story. Victoria hated almost every part of it. She hated being pregnant. She called it the shadow side of marriage, resented the way it trapped and swelled and sickened her. and she disliked newborn babies, describing them in her own letters in language that startles people today, as frog-like, ugly little things. She found breastfeeding distasteful. She was, quite possibly, sunk into what we would now recognize as postnatal depression after several of the births. And each pregnancy did something else. It pushed her out of government and pulled Albert in. When the Queen was confined, someone had to deal with the ministers and the papers, and that someone was her husband. Pregnancy by pregnancy, Albert moved from the outside of power to its very center, until he was reading every dispatch, drafting her responses, effectively running the crown while she was carrying the next child. The children she did not want were the very thing that handed her husband the throne's real power. By the time she recovered, he never fully gave it back. And yet, and this is why the Saussure version of their story pulls millions of views, the physical passion between them was intense and entirely real. For all the rows and the cold letters, Victoria desired Albert openly and wrote about it with a frankness that scandalized later, primer generations. She adored his looks, recorded her feelings on their wedding night with unmistakable delight, and remained physically infatuated with him for the whole of their marriage. That is the strange heart of it. This was not a loveless dynastic match that curdled. It was a marriage of real desire and real devotion that was, at the very same time, a grinding contest of wills. The passion and the warfare were not opposites, they were the same fire. As the years passed, Albert did something that looks, from the outside, less like a husband and more like a keeper. He came to treat Victoria's moods almost as a medical problem. He watched her rages with alarm, and in the back of his mind sat a real fear. Her grandfather, King George III, had lost his sanity entirely, and Albert seems genuinely to have worried that Victoria's emotional storms were a sign the same darkness ran in her blood. So he managed her. He controlled her surroundings, tried to regulate her feelings, corrected her, calmed her, arranged her life to keep her steady. He told himself it was for her own good, and perhaps it was. But it meant that the most powerful woman in the world was, inside her own marriage, increasingly handled, supervised, and quietly overruled by the man who loved her. Then, in December 1861, at only 42, Albert died, and the war ended in an instant, frozen forever. Victoria, who had fought him for 21 years, now had no one left to fight. And in her grief, she did something remarkable. She rebuilt the marriage in memory as the flawless, perfect union it had never quite been in life. She erased the rows, the cold letters, the battles for control, and enshrined only the devotion. The marble image of the perfect love story that we have all inherited was not the marriage. It was the monument she built on top of it. If this story stayed with you, the next one goes to what happened to Victoria after that door never opened again. The 40 years she spent in black, the servant the whole country mocked her for, and the grief that nearly cost her the crown. Subscribe to keep these stories coming, and tell me in the comments, was the greatest love story in royal history real, or was it the most beautiful thing a grieving queen ever invented?